Come on, piano man, play us something! David Chen's voice boomed across the executive lounge, slurred with expensive whiskey and cruel amusement as he gestured towards Samuel Torres, who was quietly emptying trash cans in the corner of Meridian Corporate Tower's 42nd floor. The annual shareholders' celebration was in full swing, Manhattan's financial elite celebrating another year of record profits, while Sam moved invisibly through their world, collecting champagne flutes and wiping down surfaces that cost more than his monthly rent. At 41, Sam had perfected the art of being a ghost, a Puerto Rican man in a grey uniform who existed in the margins of corporate excess, seen only when something needed cleaning. But tonight, David Chen had too much to drink and too little conscience to let Sam remain invisible. "I said play something," David repeated, his voice carrying the entitled authority of someone who'd never been told no. "We've got this beautiful Steinway just sitting here, and I bet our janitor here has some cultural musical ability." The words hung in the air like poison, the racial undertones clear to everyone in the room. A dozen senior executives turned to watch the spectacle, their faces showing varying degrees of discomfort, curiosity, and cruel anticipation. This was entertainment for them, the help being put in his place, reminded of the social hierarchy that governed their world. Sam's hands tightened on the garbage bag he was holding, his knuckles going white as he fought every instinct that screamed at him to walk away. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days sober. 2 years of attending AA meetings, in church basements, of white-knuckling through cravings that felt like drowning, of rebuilding his life one careful, sober day at a time. This was exactly the kind of situation that had driven him to drink before. The casual humiliation, the assumption that he existed for their amusement, the reduction of his humanity to their entertainment. "Sir, I'm just here to clean," Sam said quietly, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "Oh, come on," David pressed, emboldened by the alcohol and the audience. "Don't be modest. I bet you've got rhythm. All you people do, right?" Sam felt something crack inside his chest. Not his sobriety, not yet, but something deeper. The careful walls he'd built around the part of himself that used to live for music, that used to breathe jazz like oxygen, that used to believe art could heal anything. Victoria Sterling watched this exchange from across the room with growing discomfort. At 38, she'd built Meridian Corporate Tower into one of New York's most successful investment firms, but she'd never seen David Chen reveal quite this level of casual cruelty. The man was her VP of marketing, responsible for million-dollar campaigns and client relationships, and here he was, tormenting the night janitor for sport. "David, perhaps we should—" Victoria began, but David cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Victoria, relax. We're just having some fun. Right, piano man?" Sam looked around the room, seeing faces that ranged from uncomfortable to gleefully anticipatory. These people made more in bonuses than he'd make in a lifetime, lived in penthouses while he struggled to afford his Queen's apartment, sent their children to private schools while he worried about Maya's public school losing funding, and they wanted him to perform for them like a trained animal. The smart thing would be to walk away, finish his shift, go home to Maya, maintain the careful stability they'd built together since he'd gotten sober. Sam Torres, the recovering alcoholic, knew exactly what he should do. But Samuel Torres, the musician, the man who'd once played Carnegie Hall, who'd composed pieces that made grown men weep, who'd been called the most promising jazz pianist of his generation before the bottle destroyed everything, that man was still alive somewhere deep inside, and he was tired of being invisible. "All right," Sam said quietly, setting down his garbage bag and walking toward the Steinway grand piano that dominated the center of the lounge. The room fell silent as Sam sat at the bench, his calloused hands hovering over keys that felt like old friends returning after a long absence. He could feel every eye in the room on him, could sense David's smug satisfaction and Victoria's nervous anticipation. For a moment, Sam considered playing exactly what they expected, some stereotypical crowd pleaser that would confirm their assumptions and let him disappear back into invisibility. But his fingers had their own memory, and they found the opening notes of something else entirely. The piece that emerged wasn't jazz, wasn't classical, wasn't anything that fit their narrow expectations. It was Sam's own composition, written during the darkest period of his addiction, never performed for anyone because it was too raw, too honest, too much like bleeding in public. The melody began simply, a single note repeated with subtle variations, like a heartbeat struggling to maintain rhythm. Then it grew, adding layers of complexity that spoke of loss, of addiction, of the weight of being a single father trying to hold everything together when your own hands were shaking. Sam's left hand found a bass line that sounded like Maya's laughter, the only thing that had kept him alive during the worst nights. His right hand wove a melody that climbed and fell like the struggle of staying sober, of choosing hope over despair, of believing that tomorrow could be different from yesterday. The music filled the room with something none of these executives had expected. Truth. Not performance, not entertainment, but the kind of raw honesty that only came from someone who'd lost everything and was still fighting to build it back. Victoria Sterling felt tears she didn't understand streaming down her face as she listened to this man pour his soul through his fingertips. The melody spoke of things she recognized: loneliness, the weight of responsibility, the fear that you're not strong enough to protect the people depending on you. Around the room, conversations had stopped entirely. David Chen's smug expression had evaporated, replaced by something that might have been shame. Senior executives who moments before had been treating Sam like a curiosity were now confronting the reality that they'd just witnessed something profound, something that made their million-dollar lifestyles feel hollow and meaningless. The piece built to a crescendo that sounded like breaking, like every moment when Sam had wanted to give up, when the bottle had seemed like the only answer, when being a father felt like too much responsibility for someone who couldn't even take care of himself. But then it resolved into something quieter, more hopeful, not triumph, but the simple decision to keep trying, to show up, to be present for the people who needed you. When the final notes faded into silence, the room remained absolutely still. No one moved, no one spoke, no one seemed to know how to process what they'd just heard. Sam sat at the piano bench, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the keys that had just betrayed 2 years of careful emotional control. He'd promised himself he wouldn't do this, wouldn't expose himself, wouldn't give these people access to the part of him that mattered. But the music was out now, hanging in the air like a confession he couldn't take back. "I should get back to work," Sam said quietly, standing from the piano and walking back toward his abandoned garbage bag. The spell broke as he moved, and suddenly everyone was talking at once, executives whispering urgently to each other, some wiping away tears they didn't want to acknowledge, others reaching for their phones to capture some record of what they'd witnessed. Victoria Sterling remained frozen by the window, staring at Sam as he resumed his cleaning duties with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown before. But everything had changed. She'd just seen a man she'd walked past hundreds of times without really seeing, and now she couldn't understand how she'd missed the depth that was so obvious in retrospect. "Sam?" she called out, using his name for the first time. He looked up from the trash can he was emptying, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes, ma'am?" That was... Victoria struggled for words that felt adequate. That was extraordinary. Sam's face showed no emotion. "Just doing what was requested, ma'am." But Victoria could see the cost of what he'd just done, the way his hands shook slightly as he tied the garbage bag, the carefully controlled breathing of someone fighting to maintain composure. This hadn't been a performance for him. It had been surgery without anesthesia, exposing parts of himself he'd kept hidden for good reason. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Victoria asked. "Long time ago," Sam replied, not meeting her eyes. Different life. As Sam moved toward the service elevator with his cleaning cart, Victoria realized she'd just witnessed something that would change everything. Not just for Sam, but for herself, for the company, for everyone who'd been in that room. Behind her, David Chen was already pulling out his phone, recording a video as he drunkenly narrated, "You guys aren't going to believe this. Our janitor just played the most incredible piano piece I've ever heard. This is going viral for sure." Victoria wanted to stop him, to protect Sam's privacy, but it was too late. The video was already uploading, already being shared with David's extensive social media network of corporate contacts and industry insiders. By morning, the recording would have been viewed 50,000 times. By the end of the week, it would reach 2 million views and spawn dozens of reaction videos, news articles, and social media discussions about the hidden talents of service workers and the intersection of class and artistry in corporate America. But Victoria didn't know that yet. All she knew was that she'd just seen a man reveal his soul in a room full of people who treated him like furniture, and that the weight of that revelation felt like a responsibility she wasn't sure she was equipped to handle. As the elevator doors closed behind Sam, Victoria made a decision that would complicate both their lives in ways she couldn't yet imagine. She was going to find out everything she could about Samuel Torres, not the janitor, but the musician who'd just torn her heart open with nothing but melody and truth. Some performances, Victoria was beginning to understand, weren't meant to be entertainment. They were meant to be warnings. Sam's phone started buzzing at 5:47 a.m., 3 hours before his usual wake-up time and 30 minutes before his shift ended. The first call was from his AA sponsor, Marcus, whose voice carried a mixture of concern and confusion that immediately put Sam on alert. "Sam, you need to see what's happening online. Someone recorded you playing piano last night, and it's everywhere." The words hit Sam like cold water. He sat in the break room of Meridian Corporate Tower, still wearing his grey uniform, staring at his phone as Marcus sent him the link. The video was titled, "Janitor's Incredible Piano Performance Makes Executives Cry," and had been viewed 127,000 times in the 6 hours since David Chen had posted it. Sam watched himself on the small screen, seeing his own vulnerability displayed for the entertainment of strangers who would never understand the cost of what they were witnessing. The comments ranged from genuinely moved responses to casual racism to suggestions that he was wasted in his current job. "Sam?" Marcus's voice brought him back to the present. "How are you handling this?" "I don't know," Sam admitted, his hands starting to shake. Not from withdrawal. He'd been sober too long for that, but from the exposure, the sudden attention, the feeling that his carefully constructed safe life was about to collapse. "You want to meet for coffee before you head home? Talk through this?" Sam looked at the time. Maya would be getting ready for school soon, and she needed him to be present, stable, the reliable father he'd fought so hard to become. "Yeah, give me 20 minutes. The coffee shop where Sam met Marcus was the same one where they'd had their first conversation 2 years ago, when Sam had been 48 hours out of detox and shaking so hard he could barely hold a cup. Now he sat across from his sponsor, a 60-year-old electrician who'd been sober for 15 years, trying to process how one moment of emotional honesty had derailed the careful anonymity he'd built his recovery around. "Tell me what you're feeling right now," Marcus said, his voice carrying the patient authority of someone who'd guided dozens of people through the minefield of early sobriety. "Exposed," Sam said immediately. "Like I'm standing naked in Times Square. For 2 years, I've been invisible, safe, and now—" He gestured helplessly at his phone, where notifications continued to pile up. Friend requests, interview requests, messages from strangers offering everything from record deals to charity concert opportunities. "And now you're visible, whether you want to be or not. Maya's going to see this. Her friends at school, their parents, everyone's going to know that her dad is... Sam struggled with the words. Is what? Talented? Artistic? Someone who survived addiction and trauma and is raising a daughter while holding down a steady job? Someone who's one bad day away from falling apart completely? Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. Sam, recovery isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and making the choice to stay sober. Last night, you were put in a humiliating situation by people who saw you as entertainment, and you chose to respond with dignity and artistry. That's not weakness, that's strength. Sam's phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Maya. Dad, Chloe's mom saw a video of you playing piano at your work. She says it's amazing. Why didn't you tell me you used to be famous? The question hit harder than any of the online comments. Sam had never explicitly lied to Maya about his past, but he'd been deliberately vague about why he'd stopped playing music professionally, why they'd moved from Manhattan to Queens, why some nights he still woke up screaming from dreams about his best friend and musical partner Rico dying from an overdose, while Sam was too drunk to help. I have to get home, Sam said, standing abruptly. Maya has questions, and she deserves honest answers. Sam, Marcus called as he headed toward the door. Remember that honesty doesn't mean telling a 12-year-old everything. You can be truthful without being traumatizing. The subway ride back to Queens felt endless, every stranger's glance making Sam wonder if they'd seen the video, if they were judging him, if they thought they knew his story based on 3 minutes of recorded performance. By the time he reached his apartment building, the view count had reached 300,000, and the video was being shared by musicians, social media influencers, and news outlets looking for feel-good content. Maya was waiting for him at the kitchen table, her laptop open to the video that was reshaping their lives, whether they wanted it to or not. At 12, she had her mother's eyes and Sam's stubborn determination. But she also carried a maturity that came from being the child of someone in recovery, always watching, always ready to step in if Dad seemed like he might be struggling. So, Maya said without preamble, you used to be a professional musician. Sam sat across from her, still in his work uniform, trying to figure out how to explain 20 years of choices, mistakes, and consequences to someone who'd been alive for barely half that time. Yes, he said simply. I played jazz piano professionally for about 15 years, from when I was 20 until I stopped. The video has 2 million views now, Maya said, turning her laptop so he could see the screen. People are calling you a hidden genius and asking why you're wasting your talent as a janitor. Sam winced at the casual dismissal of the work that had kept them housed and fed for 2 years. Maya, there's nothing wrong with being a janitor. It's honest work that pays our bills and gives me a schedule that lets me be home when you need me. I know that, Dad. But why did you stop playing music? And don't give me some vague answer about it being complicated. I'm not a little kid anymore. Maya was right. She wasn't a little kid. She was a 7th grader who'd learned to check on her father's emotional state before asking about homework help, who knew the signs of when he might need space to deal with cravings, who'd grown up understanding that addiction was a family disease that required everyone to be vigilant. I stopped playing because I was drinking too much, and drinking was destroying my ability to make music, to maintain relationships, to be the person I wanted to be, Sam said carefully. When your mom died, and I became your only parent, I had to choose between music and recovery. I chose recovery because you needed me to be stable more than the world needed me to be artistic. Maya absorbed this information with the seriousness she brought to all discussions about her father's sobriety. But you're sober now. You've been sober for over 2 years. Couldn't you play music again without drinking? The question was logical, reasonable, and terrifying. Sam had been avoiding it for months as his 2-year sobriety anniversary approached, as he'd started feeling more confident in his recovery, as he'd begun to miss the creative expression that had once been as essential as breathing. "I don't know," Sam admitted. "Music and drinking were so connected for me that I'm not sure I can separate them. The last time I tried to play professionally, He stopped, remembering Rico's funeral, the guilt that had driven him to a 3-day bender that had nearly killed him. "What happened, Dad?" Before Sam could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Victoria Sterling's name, which surprised him. He hadn't realized she had his number, and executives certainly didn't call janitors at home. "Mr. Torres?" Victoria's voice was formal, but carried an undercurrent of excitement that put Sam immediately on guard. "I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to discuss the video from last night, and some opportunities that might interest you." Sam looked at Maya, who was listening with obvious curiosity. "Miss Sterling, I appreciate the call, but I'm not looking for opportunities. I have a job that works for my family. I understand your caution, but this could be life-changing. I've been contacted by 3 recording labels, a documentary filmmaker, and Carnegie Hall's community outreach program. They all want to meet with you." The names hit Sam like physical blows. Carnegie Hall, where he'd performed his first professional concert at 23, full of dreams and certainty that music would be his path to everything good in life. Recording labels, the same industry that had enabled his self-destruction by treating artistic brilliance as more important than human well-being. "Miss Sterling, I'm not interested." "Sam," Victoria's voice shifted, becoming more personal. "I saw something extraordinary last night. Not just talent, but emotional depth that most professional musicians never achieve. You have a gift that could touch millions of people." "And what would that cost me?" Sam asked, looking at Maya's worried expression. "Because everything has a cost, and I've learned to be very careful about what I'm willing to pay." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What if we could structure something that protected your recovery? Limited engagements, controlled environments, built-in support systems." "There's no such thing as a controlled environment in the music industry," Sam said flatly. "It's chaos and pressure, and people who think artistic vision justifies personal destruction. I've seen too many talented people die young because they believed their art was worth more than their lives." Maya reached across the table and took his free hand, a gesture that reminded Sam why he'd made the choices he'd made, why stability mattered more than recognition. "Mr. Torres," Victoria said, her voice carrying a note of desperation that surprised him. "What if this isn't about the music industry? What if it's about using your gift to help people, to create something meaningful that doesn't require you to sacrifice your recovery?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we developed a music program here at Meridian, for employees, for community outreach, for people who need art in their lives but don't have access to it? You could teach, perform occasionally, use your talents in service of something larger than the entertainment industry." Sam felt something shift in his chest, not the desperate hunger for applause that had driven his younger self, but a quieter desire to be useful, to transform his experience into something that might help others. "I'd need to think about it," Sam said finally. "Of course, but Sam, the video isn't going away. The attention isn't going to disappear. You can either hide from it and hope it passes, or you can take control of the narrative and use it for something positive." After Victoria hung up, Sam sat with Maya in their small kitchen, both of them staring at the laptop screen where strangers continued to comment on a performance that had cost him more emotional energy than 2 years of recovery meetings. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Maya asked. Sam looked at his daughter, this brave, intelligent girl who'd grown up too fast because of his mistakes, who deserved a father who was present and stable and proud of the work he did to support their family. "I'm going to be very, very careful," Sam said. And I'm going to remember that the most important audience for my life is sitting right here at this table." Maya smiled, but Sam could see the worry in her eyes. She understood better than anyone that good intentions and careful planning meant nothing if addiction decided to reassert itself. Some opportunities, Sam was learning, were just elaborate invitations to relapse. The question was whether he was strong enough to accept help without accepting the chaos that usually came with it. 3 weeks after the video reached 5 million views, Sam's carefully constructed life began unraveling in ways he hadn't anticipated. The first casualty was his job at Meridian Corporate Tower, not because he was fired, but because his supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, called him into her office with an expression that mixed regret with administrative necessity. "Sam, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to let you go," Janet said, her voice carrying genuine sadness. "Corporate says there's a conflict of interest now that you're famous. Something about liability and media attention affecting building security." Sam sat in the small office where he'd received performance reviews for 2 years, feeling the familiar panic that came with threats to his stability. "Janet, I never asked for any of this attention. I just want to do my job and go home to my daughter." "I know, and your work has always been exemplary. But ever since that video went viral, we've had reporters trying to get into the building, social media influencers attempting to recreate the moment, and yesterday someone from Good Morning America showed up asking to interview you during your shift. The severance package was generous, 6 weeks' pay and a positive reference. But it meant Sam would lose the health insurance that covered Maya's therapy sessions and his own addiction counseling. It meant starting over in a job market where his face was now recognizable, where potential employers might see him as a liability rather than an asset. "There's one more thing," Janet added reluctantly. "Ms. Sterling asked me to give you this." The envelope contained a formal offer to become Meridian's Director of Community Arts Programming, with a salary 3 times what he'd made as a janitor, and benefits that included family therapy coverage. It was everything he should want: financial security, professional respect, the chance to use his musical abilities for something meaningful. But Sam had been sober long enough to recognize when something felt too good to be true. That evening, he sat at Maya's bedside as she struggled with algebra homework, trying to explain quadratic equations while his own mind raced with calculations about their financial future. Maya had been quieter since the video went viral, more watchful, as if she sensed that their stability was threatened by forces beyond their control. "Dad," Maya said, setting down her pencil with the deliberate precision she used when broaching difficult topics, "Aunt Carmen called while you were at work today." Sam's stomach clenched. Carmen was his older sister, a nurse who disapproved of every major decision he'd made since their parents died 15 years ago. She'd been particularly vocal about his choice to raise Maya alone after her mother's death, suggesting multiple times that a recovering alcoholic wasn't equipped to parent a grieving child. What did she want? She saw the video. She wants to visit this weekend to assess the situation. Maya used air quotes, unconsciously mimicking Carmen's authoritative tone. She's worried that all this attention might be destabilizing for our family. The euphemism didn't hide Carmen's real concern, that the stress and exposure might trigger Sam's addiction, leaving Maya vulnerable. It was a reasonable fear, one that Sam shared but couldn't admit without confirming his sister's long-held belief that he was fundamentally unfit for parenthood. "Maya, are you worried about that too?" Maya looked up from her homework with eyes that held too much wisdom for a 12-year-old. "I'm worried that you'll start believing what people are saying online, that you're wasting your talent, that you should be performing again, that being a janitor means you're somehow less than what you could be." The insight was devastating in its accuracy. Sam had been reading the comments obsessively, particularly the ones suggesting that his real calling was music, that maintaining an ordinary job was somehow betraying his gifts. The attention felt like validation he'd been craving without realizing it, but Maya saw the danger more clearly than he did. "You know that's not how I see my work, right?" "I know that's not how you used to see it," Maya corrected gently. "But I've noticed you checking your phone more, staying up late reading articles about yourself. You're starting to believe their version of who you should be instead of being proud of who you already are." Before Sam could respond, his phone buzzed with yet another notification. This time, it was a direct message from someone claiming to represent Lin-Manuel Miranda, asking if Sam would be interested in contributing to a benefit concert for addiction recovery services. The opportunity was exactly the kind of meaningful work Victoria had suggested, using his talents for community benefit rather than personal gain. But even as Sam felt tempted by the possibility, he noticed Maya watching his face for signs of the obsessive enthusiasm that had preceded every previous relapse. Carmen arrived that Saturday morning like a hurricane in scrubs, her nursing supervisor authority filling Sam's small apartment with professional judgment, disguised as family concern. At 45, she was 3 years older than Sam and had appointed herself the family's voice of reason after their parents' death, a role she'd never relinquished despite Sam's 2 years of successful sobriety. "Samuel," she said, settling at the kitchen table with the same no-nonsense efficiency she brought to managing ICU patients, "we need to discuss what's best for Maya." Sam poured coffee with hands that stayed steady through force of will, recognizing the opening move in a conversation he'd been dreading since Carmen announced her visit. "Maya is doing well. Her grades are good, she's in therapy to process her mother's death, and she has a stable home environment." "That was true before you became internet famous," Carmen replied, pulling out her phone to scroll through screenshots she'd apparently been collecting. "But now you're getting offers to perform, to record music, to return to the lifestyle that nearly destroyed you before. I haven't accepted any of those offers. Yet." Carmen's voice carried the clinical certainty that made her an excellent nurse and an exhausting sister. "But you're considering them. Maya can see it, I can see it. And frankly, it's irresponsible to put a child through the uncertainty of wondering whether her father is going to prioritize his artistic ego over her emotional security." Maya appeared in the kitchen doorway, having clearly been listening from her bedroom. "Aunt Carmen, Dad isn't going to relapse just because people want him to play music again. Sweetheart, addiction is a disease that affects decision-making," Carmen said in the patronizing tone she used with pediatric patients. "When addicts start believing they can handle situations that previously triggered destructive behavior, they're usually already in the early stages of relapse." Sam felt anger building in his chest, not the explosive rage that had characterized his drinking years, but the cold fury that came from watching someone undermine his relationship with his daughter, using clinical language to disguise personal judgment. "Carmen, I appreciate your concern, but Maya and I have been managing our lives successfully for 2 years. We have support systems, therapy, and honest communication about the challenges of recovery. And what happens when the pressure becomes too much? When the offers become too tempting, when you start convincing yourself that you can handle just one drink to calm your nerves before a performance?" The scenario was terrifyingly specific because Carmen had witnessed Sam's previous relapses, had been the one to pick up Maya from school when Sam was too drunk to remember he had parenting responsibilities. Her fears weren't irrational. They were based on painful experience with Sam's past choices. "I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago," Sam said quietly. "No, you're a person under unprecedented stress who's being offered everything he used to think he wanted most in the world," Carmen shot back. "That's not recovery, that's temptation packaged as opportunity." Maya moved to stand beside Sam's chair, her presence a reminder of what was actually at stake in this conversation. "What do you want to happen, Aunt Carmen?" Carmen's expression softened as she looked at her niece, and Sam could see the genuine love underneath her controlling concern. "I want you to be safe, Maya. I want you to have stability and security and adults in your life who prioritize your well-being over their own desires." "Then you want Dad to keep doing exactly what he's been doing," Maya said with 12-year-old logic. "Because he's been putting my well-being first every single day since Mom died." The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering contingency plans for childcare if Sam relapsed, financial arrangements if he lost his income, and Carmen's offer to have Maya live with her temporarily if the situation became unstable. By the time Carmen left, Sam felt emotionally exhausted, and Maya looked like she'd aged several years in a single morning. That evening, as they sat together watching a movie Maya had chosen specifically because it was mindless and comforting, Sam's phone rang with Victoria Sterling's number. "Sam, I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to discuss the arts programming position one more time." Sam looked at Maya, who was pretending to focus on the television while obviously listening to his side of the conversation. "Ms. Sterling, I appreciate the offer, but I don't think I'm the right person for that kind of position." "Why not? Your musical ability is evident. You have experience with community outreach through your AA work, and you understand the challenges facing working families because you've lived them. Because taking that job would mean accepting that I'm somehow too good for the work I've been doing," Sam said, "and because my daughter is more important than my career advancement." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sam, what if I told you that Maya could be part of the program? That we could create opportunities for young people to engage with music and arts as well as adults?" Maya looked up sharply, her interest obvious despite her attempt to seem disinterested. "What kind of opportunities?" Sam asked carefully. "Music lessons, youth ensembles, summer programs that combine arts education with life skills training." Maya could help design programming for her age group, could be involved in ways that support the family dynamic rather than threatening it. Sam felt the familiar tug of possibility, the sense that maybe this time could be different, that maybe he could reclaim part of his artistic identity without sacrificing his role as Maya's father. "I'd want very specific boundaries," Sam said finally. "No late-night events, no travel that requires overnight stays, no situations that put me in contact with alcohol or substances. Of course, this would be a community-focused position, not a return to the music industry. The goal is to serve others, not to rebuild your performing career." Maya reached over and took Sam's hand, a gesture that reminded him that whatever decision he made would affect both of them. "Can I have until Monday to decide?" Sam asked. "Absolutely. But Sam, the offer isn't going to stay open indefinitely. There are other qualified candidates, and the board is already questioning whether hiring you might attract too much media attention." After Victoria hung up, Sam sat with Maya in their small living room, both of them understanding that they were facing a choice that would determine their family's future. "What do you think, Maya?" "I think," Maya said carefully, "that you should do whatever makes you feel proud of yourself without making you scared of yourself." The wisdom in her answer reminded Sam why she was the most important critic his life would ever have. Some opportunities, he was learning, were worth the risk only if they strengthened rather than threatened the relationships that mattered most. Victoria Sterling hadn't expected to find herself personally invested in the employment decisions of a former janitor. But 3 months into developing Meridian's community arts program, she realized that Sam Torres had become central to her vision of what corporate responsibility could actually accomplish. The program had started small, a pilot initiative offering music lessons to employees' children and community members who couldn't afford private instruction. But under Sam's careful guidance, it had evolved into something more comprehensive. therapy-informed arts education that recognized trauma, economic stress, and family instability as barriers to creative expression rather than personal failings. The key, Sam explained during their weekly planning meeting, is understanding that not everyone comes to music from a place of joy. Some people need art to process grief. Some need it to build confidence. Some need it just to have 1 hour a week where they're valued for something other than their productivity. Victoria watched Sam work with a teenage girl whose father had been laid off 6 months earlier, gently coaxing melody from someone who'd initially claimed she wasn't musical. His approach was nothing like the traditional piano instruction Victoria remembered from her own childhood. No rigid technique demands, no pressure to perform, just patient encouragement that met each student where they were. "Sam," Victoria said as they cleaned up after the evening sessions, "the board is asking questions about expanding the program. They want metrics, data on how this affects employee satisfaction and community relations." Sam paused in his organizing of sheet music, his expression becoming guarded. Over the past 3 months, Victoria had learned to recognize when he was calculating whether a request might threaten his recovery or his relationship with Maya. What kind of expansion are they talking about? Additional locations, maybe partnerships with other corporations, possibly a scholarship fund for students who show exceptional talent. Victoria tried to keep her voice neutral, but she could hear her own excitement creeping in. This could become a model for how businesses integrate community service with employee benefits. And what would that mean for my role? Victoria hesitated, recognizing that her answer could determine whether Sam remained part of the program or decided the pressure was becoming too dangerous for his sobriety. It would mean more responsibility, higher visibility, and probably some travel to consult with other companies interested in similar programs. Sam was quiet for a long moment, straightening chairs with the methodical precision he brought to all tasks when he needed time to think. "Victoria, can I ask you something directly?" "Of course." "Undia, are you developing this program because you believe in community arts education, or because you want to turn my story into corporate marketing material?" The question was fair and uncomfortable. Victoria had initially been drawn to Sam's situation by the viral video and the positive publicity it could generate for Meridian, but working with him over the past months had shifted her understanding of what they were actually building together. "Both," Victoria admitted. "I'd be lying if I said the positive press wasn't a factor initially, but watching you work with students, seeing how the program affects families in our community, this has become about much more than corporate image. What's it become about for you?" Victoria considered the question seriously. Her own relationship with arts and creativity had been complicated by family expectations that prioritized achievement over expression, success over satisfaction. Watching Sam help others reconnect with artistic joy had forced her to examine what she'd sacrificed in her climb to corporate leadership. "It's become about remembering that business exists to serve human flourishing, not the other way around," Victoria said. "You've shown me that supporting people's creative development isn't charity, it's investment in the kind of community we want to live in." Before Sam could respond, Maya appeared in the doorway of the music room, her violin case slung over her shoulder and her expression carrying the combination of pride and protective concern that had become her signature look when watching her father navigate professional opportunities. "Dad, Mrs. Patterson is here to pick me up for study group. Are you almost done?" "Just finishing up, sweetheart. How was your lesson today?" Maya's face brightened immediately. "Really good. Elena thinks I'm ready to try the Bach piece we've been working toward, and Jessica's mum asked if the program might add group ensemble opportunities for intermediate students." Victoria watched the interaction between father and daughter, noting how Maya served as both motivation and reality check for Sam's professional decisions. The 12-year-old had developed sophisticated awareness of when her father was pushing himself too hard, when opportunities might threaten their family stability, when support was needed to maintain his recovery. "Maya," Victoria said, "how do you feel about the possibility of expanding the program? Your dad would have more responsibilities, but it would also mean more opportunities for students like you." Maya looked between Victoria and her father with the seriousness she brought to all discussions about their family's future. "Would Dad have to travel a lot? Or work late nights when I need help with homework? We'd structure anything to respect his family priorities," Victoria assured her. "No overnight travel, no evening events that conflict with family time. And would there still be time for Dad to keep going to his meetings and staying healthy?" The directness of the question reminded Victoria that Maya understood addiction as a family disease requiring constant vigilance and support. This wasn't a child asking for permission to expand their lifestyle. This was a recovery partner ensuring that new stresses wouldn't threaten the stability they'd built together. "Maya, those commitments would be non-negotiable," Victoria said. "Your father's health and your family's well-being are more important than any program expansion." Maya nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. "Then I think it sounds good, as long as Dad wants to do it." After Maya left with her friend's mother, Victoria and Sam finished cleaning the music room in comfortable silence. The space had been transformed over the past months from a sterile conference room into something that felt alive with creative possibility. Instruments arranged invitingly, student artwork covering the walls, comfortable seating that encouraged collaboration rather than formal instruction. "Sam," Victoria said as they turned off the lights, "there's something else I want to discuss with you. Something personal." Sam waited, his expression curious but cautious. "This program, working with you and the students, it's changed how I think about leadership, about what success actually means. I've been so focused on corporate achievement that I'd forgotten why any of this matters." "What do you mean?" Victoria struggled to articulate feelings she was still processing. "I mean that watching you prioritize Maya's well-being over career advancement, seeing how you use your talents to serve others rather than seeking recognition, it's made me question whether I've been defining success in ways that actually make me less successful as a human being." Sam studied her face in the hallway lighting, recognizing something he'd seen in mirrors during his early recovery. The look of someone beginning to understand that their previous priorities might have been fundamentally misguided. "Victoria, are you saying that you want to make changes in your own life?" "I'm saying that I've spent so much time building a career that I've never built a life worth living. I don't have close relationships, I don't have creative outlets, I don't have anything that matters beyond quarterly reports and board meetings." The admission was more vulnerable than Victoria had intended, but something about Sam's presence made honesty feel safer than pretense. "What would change look like for you?" Sam asked gently. "I don't know. Maybe learning to play an instrument myself. Maybe developing friendships that aren't based on professional networking. Maybe figuring out how to be valuable to people for reasons other than my business expertise." Sam smiled, the first genuinely warm expression Victoria had seen from him since they'd started working together. "Victoria, you've created a program that's changing lives in this community. You've used your business skills to make art accessible to people who need it. You're already using your talents to serve others, but I'm doing it from a distance, as an administrator rather than a participant. I want to understand what you and the students experience when you're making music together. Are you asking if you can take lessons?" Victoria felt slightly embarrassed by the eagerness in her own voice. "Would that be inappropriate? I know you usually work with children and community members, not corporate executives." "Victoria, music doesn't care about your job title or your income bracket. If you want to learn, you should learn." Over the following weeks, Victoria began staying after the regular program sessions for her own piano lessons with Sam. The experience was humbling in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her natural inclination toward perfectionism clashed with the patient, process-oriented approach Sam used with all his students. "You're trying to get to the destination without taking the journey," Sam observed during a particularly frustrating lesson where Victoria couldn't master a simple melody because she kept anticipating mistakes instead of focusing on the present moment. "I'm used to being competent at things," Victoria admitted. "This is harder than running a corporation." "That's because running a corporation uses skills you've spent decades developing. This requires you to be a beginner again, to accept that growth is more important than performance." Maya, who often did homework in the music room while her father taught evening lessons, looked up from her algebra textbook. "Victoria, when I first started violin, I cried because I couldn't make it sound like the musicians on Dad's recordings. He told me that comparing my beginning to someone else's middle was like being mad at a seed for not being a tree yet." The wisdom of the observation wasn't lost on Victoria, who realized she'd been approaching music with the same competitive mindset that had driven her corporate success, focusing on outcomes rather than process, measuring herself against external standards rather than personal growth. "How do I learn to be patient with myself?" Victoria asked. Sam and Maya exchanged glances, sharing the wordless communication that characterized their close relationship. "You practice failing better," Maya said matter-of-factly. "Dad taught me that mistakes aren't enemies, they're information about what to try differently next time." As Victoria struggled through scales and simple melodies over the following months, she began to understand what Sam had meant about music serving different functions for different people. For her, learning piano wasn't about artistic expression. It was about developing tolerance for imperfection, acceptance of gradual progress, and appreciation for process over product. "This is changing more than just my musical ability," Victoria confided to Sam during one of their lessons. "It's changing how I approach everything: business decisions, relationships, my expectations of myself and others." "That's what good teachers do," Sam replied. "They don't just transfer skills, they model ways of being in the world that serve human flourishing." Victoria realized that Sam had become more than an employee or even a colleague. He'd become a guide toward a way of living that prioritized growth over achievement, service over recognition, and authentic connection over professional networking. Some partnerships, she was learning, transformed both parties in ways that had nothing to do with the original job description. As the community arts program prepared for its first public showcase, an evening of student performances designed to celebrate progress rather than perfection, Victoria understood that she and Sam had built something that served their community while healing their own relationship with creativity, ambition, and what it meant to use talents in service of others. The question now was whether their growing personal connection could survive the increased scrutiny and pressure that came with program expansion and public recognition. Some alliances, Victoria was beginning to understand, were tested not by conflict, but by success. The crisis began on a Tuesday evening in late October, 8 months after the viral video had first exposed Sam's musical abilities to the world. The Community Arts Program's first annual showcase was scheduled for the following weekend, featuring performances by students ranging from 6-year-old beginners to adult learners who discovered music later in life. Sam had been working 12-hour days preparing for the event, his usual careful balance between work and recovery meetings slipping as the pressure mounted. Maya noticed first, the way she always did. Her father was staying up too late reviewing performance notes, checking his phone obsessively for updates about the showcase publicity, and displaying the restless energy that had preceded every previous relapse. When she found him at 2 a.m., staring at his laptop screen, reading reviews of his old recordings that someone had posted online, she knew they were in dangerous territory. "Dad," Maya said quietly, settling beside him on the couch, "you're spiraling." The directness of her observation hit Sam like cold water. He looked at his daughter, 13 now, more perceptive than most adults, and saw the fear in her eyes that she was trying to hide behind calm concern. "I'm just preparing for the showcase," Sam said, but even to his own ears the explanation sounded hollow. "No, you're obsessing. You're reading everything people say about you online. You're working more hours than you did when you were drinking. And you missed your meeting with Marcus yesterday." Sam had forgotten about the missed sponsor meeting, a lapse that would have been unthinkable during his first year of sobriety. The realization that his recovery routines were being compromised by professional pressure confirmed Maya's assessment. He was indeed spiraling, caught in the familiar pattern of using work to avoid addressing underlying emotional stress. "Maya, I'm fine. The showcase is important, more important than staying sober," Maya interrupted, her voice carrying an edge that reminded Sam uncomfortably of his sister Carmen. "Because that's what it looks like from where I'm sitting." Before Sam could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, the voice was one he'd been dreading for months. Sammy. The nickname hit him like a physical blow, carrying 20 years of history in 2 syllables. "I saw the video, hermano. Saw what you've been up to." Miguel Santos had been Sam's musical partner for 15 years, the other half of the Torres-Santos duo that had been poised for major label success before addiction destroyed everything. Miguel had been in the room the night Rico died, had watched Sam's descent into alcoholic self-destruction, had tried unsuccessfully to maintain their musical partnership as Sam became increasingly unreliable. "Miguel," Sam said, his voice carefully neutral while his heart hammered against his ribs. "It's been a long time." "Too long, man. I'm in New York for a recording session. Thought maybe we could meet up. Talk about old times, maybe play together again." "I heard you're clean now." The casual reference to being clean rather than sober told Sam everything he needed to know about Miguel's own relationship with substances. In recovery circles, language mattered. People who were actively using often couldn't distinguish between temporary abstinence and committed sobriety. "Miguel, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm in recovery, and I have responsibilities here." "Come on, Sammy. One drink for old time's sake. We could work on some new material, maybe put together a tribute for Rico. I've got connections now, real industry people who remember what we used to be." The conversation continued for 10 more minutes, Miguel's voice becoming more insistent as Sam's responses became more guarded. By the time Sam hung up, Maya was watching him with the expression she used when monitoring his emotional state for signs of relapse. "Who was that?" Maya asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer would be complicated. "Someone from my music days, before recovery. Someone who wants you to drink again." Sam looked at his daughter, this brave, intelligent girl who'd grown up understanding that her father's sobriety was a daily choice that required constant vigilance, and realized he couldn't lie to her. "Yes," he said simply. Maya was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to all threats to their family stability. "Dad, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to call Marcus and schedule an emergency meeting. I'm going to be honest about the pressure I've been feeling, and I'm going to remember that the most important performance of my life happens every day when I choose to be your father instead of chasing recognition that doesn't matter." But even as Sam said the words, he could feel the pull of old dreams, old relationships, old versions of himself that had felt more authentic than the careful, responsible man he'd become. Miguel's call had awakened something Sam thought he'd successfully buried, the belief that his real life had been left behind when he chose recovery over artistry. The showcase was held on a Saturday evening in Meridian's main conference center, transformed for the night into an intimate performance venue. Students performed pieces ranging from classical etudes to original compositions. their families filling folding chairs with the kind of supportive energy that made amateur recitals more moving than professional concerts. Sam sat at the piano for the evening's final number, a piece he'd composed specifically for the program, celebrating the courage it took for adults to learn new skills and children to share their developing talents. But as his fingers found the opening notes, something felt wrong. The melody that had felt meaningful during practice now seemed hollow, performative, disconnected from the genuine emotion that had once made his music transcendent. In the audience, Victoria watched Sam's performance with growing concern. Something was different tonight. His technical skill was flawless, but the emotional authenticity that characterized his teaching and previous performances was missing. He looked like someone going through the motions of being himself, rather than actually being present in the moment. After the showcase ended and families began leaving with congratulations and promises to continue lessons, Victoria found Sam alone in the music room, staring at the piano keys with an expression she couldn't read. "Sam, that was beautiful," Victoria said, settling beside him on the piano bench. "The students were incredible, and your piece was—" "Fake," Sam interrupted quietly. "It was technically competent and emotionally empty. I was performing the idea of being musical rather than actually making music." Victoria was quiet for a moment, recognizing that Sam was processing something deeper than post-performance nerves. "What's going on?" Sam told her about Miguel's call, about the pressure he'd been feeling to justify the program's expansion, about the growing sense that he was using community service as another form of hiding from the artistic ambitions that had once defined his identity. "I've been telling myself that this program is about serving others," Sam said, "but I think it's really about finding a way to stay close to music without risking the chaos that comes with actually pursuing it seriously. And that's a problem because I'm not being honest with myself about what I really want, and people in recovery who aren't honest with themselves usually end up drinking." Victoria felt a stab of fear, recognizing that the program she'd come to see as personally and professionally meaningful might be causing the kind of stress that threatened Sam's sobriety. "Sam, what do you need? What would help you get back to a healthier place?" Before Sam could answer, Maya appeared in the doorway, her violin case in hand, and her expression carrying the kind of determined seriousness that reminded Victoria that this 13-year-old had more experience managing family crisis than most adults. "Dad," Maya said, "Aunt Carmen is here. She wants to talk to both of us." Carmen Torres entered the music room with the professional bearing that had made her an effective ICU nurse and an intimidating family intervention specialist. She'd driven from Hartford after Maya called her earlier that week, worried about Sam's increasing work hours and missed recovery meetings. "Samuel," Carmen said, settling into one of the student chairs with the no-nonsense efficiency that characterized all her interactions, "Maya tells me you've been struggling with the pressures of this new position." "I'm managing fine," Sam replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Missing sponsor meetings, working 12-hour days, and getting phone calls from old using friends isn't managing fine," Carmen said bluntly. "It's early relapse behavior disguised as professional dedication." Victoria realized she was witnessing a family intervention and started to leave, but Maya gestured for her to stay. "Victoria should hear this too," Maya said. "She needs to understand what it looks like when Dad is in danger of drinking again." For the next hour, Carmen systematically dismantled Sam's rationalizations about his recent behavior, using clinical language and tough love to force him to acknowledge that he was displaying warning signs of impending relapse. Maya contributed her own observations about changes in her father's routine, sleep patterns, and emotional availability. "The question," Carmen said finally, "is whether you're willing to make the changes necessary to protect your recovery, or whether Maya needs to come stay with me while you figure out if you can handle this level of professional pressure." The ultimatum hung in the air like a physical presence. Sam looked at Maya, seeing the fear and love in her expression, understanding that his daughter was once again being forced to monitor his choices for signs of impending self-destruction. "What changes are you talking about?" Sam asked quietly. "Step back from the program expansion," Carmen said immediately. "Return to a schedule that allows for proper recovery maintenance. Stop taking calls from people who want to pull you back into the music industry. Focus on being Maya's father instead of trying to rebuild your artistic career through the back door." "But the program is helping people," Sam protested. "The students are making real progress. The community is benefiting. And none of that matters if you drink again," Maya interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of finality that reminded everyone in the room that she'd been living with the consequences of Sam's addiction since she was old enough to understand what addiction meant. Victoria watched this family navigate the intersection of recovery, professional opportunity, and parental responsibility, understanding for the first time the full complexity of what Sam had been managing while building the community arts program. "Sam," Victoria said quietly, "what if we restructured everything, reduced your hours, brought in additional staff, eliminated any responsibilities that create pressure to travel or attend evening events?" Carmen shook her head immediately. "Victoria, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but the problem isn't the specific job requirements. The problem is that this entire situation is triggering Samuel's underlying belief that he's only valuable when he's performing, when he's being recognized for his artistic talents rather than his character as a person." The observation hit Sam like a revelation. Carmen was right. He'd been using the community arts program as a way to maintain connection to his artistic identity without confronting the deeper question of whether he could be valuable, lovable, and worthy of respect without being exceptional at something. "So, what's the solution?" Sam asked. "The solution," Carmen said, "is remembering that the most important audience for your life is sitting right here in this room, and she doesn't need you to be famous or talented or professionally successful. She needs you to be sober, present, and committed to putting her well-being above your artistic ego." Sam looked at Maya, seeing his daughter's face clearly for the first time in weeks, rather than through the distracted haze of professional pressure and artistic ambition. "Maya," he said quietly, "what do you want me to do?" "I want you to be my dad," Maya replied simply. "Not a musician who happens to have a daughter, but a father who happens to be musical. There's a difference." As the family meeting continued into the evening, Sam realized that recovery wasn't just about staying sober. It was about building a life where sobriety served something larger than itself, where daily choices supported the relationships and values that mattered most. Some confrontations, he was learning, weren't with external enemies, but with internal voices that suggested happiness required more than what you already had. The choice now was whether to listen to those voices or to trust that being Maya's father was sufficient justification for any life he might build. 2.5 years after the viral video that had nearly destroyed Sam's carefully constructed life, he sat in a modest recording studio in Astoria, Queens, watching Maya work with a group of teenage musicians on an arrangement of one of his original compositions. The song was being included in a compilation album of recovery-themed music, with all proceeds supporting community addiction services. Exactly the kind of meaningful but low-pressure musical involvement that had taken him months to learn how to accept. The studio wasn't glamorous, cramped with outdated equipment and acoustic tiles that had seen better decades, but it felt safe in ways that Carnegie Hall never had. There were no industry executives evaluating commercial potential, no pressure to perform beyond his current emotional capacity, no expectations that art should come at the cost of personal stability. "Dad," Maya called from behind the microphone. Now 15 and possessing both her mother's musical intuition and her father's understanding of how songs could carry meaning beyond entertainment. "Can you play the bridge section again? I want to try a different harmony line." Sam smiled at the easy collaboration that had evolved between them over the past 2 years. Maya had become not just his daughter, but his musical partner in ways that honored both their individual talents and their family relationship. She'd also become, at 15, remarkably skilled at recognizing when her father needed space to process emotions without turning to unhealthy coping mechanisms. The path to this moment had been neither straight nor easy. After the family intervention following the showcase, Sam had stepped back from the community arts program at Meridian, accepting a part-time position that allowed him to teach individual students without the administrative pressure that had triggered his near relapse. The decision had cost him financially and professionally. Victoria had been forced to hire someone else to manage program expansion, and Sam's income had dropped to less than half what he'd been making during his brief tenure as program director. But it had also saved his sobriety and his relationship with Maya. "The harmony sounds good," Sam said, adjusting the piano arrangement to support his daughter's vocal interpretation. "But remember, the song is about hope after despair, not victory over struggle. The emotion should feel earned rather than triumphant." Maya nodded, understanding immediately. She'd grown up around recovery language and concepts, knew the difference between sustainable progress and unsustainable perfectionism. At 15, she could recognize the signs of her father's stress more accurately than most addiction counselors. But she'd also learned to trust that he would ask for help when he needed it, rather than trying to manage everything alone. The recording session was part of a project Sam had been working on for 18 months, a collection of songs written during his recovery, performed by musicians who were also in various stages of healing from addiction, trauma, or life circumstances that had required them to rebuild their relationship with their artistic gifts. "Sam," called Maria Santos, the session coordinator and Miguel's sister, who'd become an unexpected ally in Sam's efforts to maintain creative connection without professional chaos. "We're ready for the final take whenever you and Maya are." Maria had reached out to Sam 6 months after Miguel's disastrous phone call, explaining that her brother was in treatment for cocaine addiction, and had asked her to apologize for the pressure he'd put on Sam to return to their old musical partnership. The conversation had led to a careful rebuild of relationships with people from Sam's music industry past, some successful, others requiring permanent boundaries, all of them teaching him that recovery meant redefining rather than abandoning important connections. As Sam and Maya performed the final version of "Tomorrow's Promise," a song Sam had written about the daily choice to believe that sobriety was worth the work it required, he felt the deep satisfaction that came from creating something meaningful without sacrificing personal stability. The song would reach maybe 10,000 people through the compilation album, a fraction of the audience his viral video had attracted, but it represented artistic expression that supported rather than threatened his recovery. "That was beautiful," Victoria said from the control booth, where she'd been quietly observing the session. Her relationship with Sam had evolved over the past 2 years from professional collaboration to genuine friendship, with romantic undertones that both acknowledged but were taking extremely slowly. Victoria's own transformation had been as gradual as Sam's. She'd reduced her work hours by 20%, started taking piano lessons with one of the community program instructors, and began therapy to address what she'd come to understand as her own addiction to achievement and external validation. The changes had cost her professionally. She'd been passed over for a promotion to regional director, partly because board members questioned her shifting priorities. But they'd also given her the first genuinely satisfying personal relationships of her adult life. "How are you feeling about the recording?" Victoria asked Sam as they packed up equipment and prepared to leave the studio. "Good," Sam said, meaning it. "Like we created something honest that might help other people without requiring me to become someone I can't sustain being." This had become Sam's criteria for all professional opportunities, whether they asked him to be more than he could healthily maintain, whether they supported his relationship with Maya, whether they aligned with his recovery values rather than challenging them. The approach had meant turning down several high-profile opportunities over the past 2 years. A documentary filmmaker had wanted to follow his journey back to music, but the cameras and narrative pressure felt too much like performance rather than authentic living. A major addiction treatment center had offered him a spokesperson position, but the travel requirements would have conflicted with Maya's need for consistent parental presence. A jazz festival had invited him to perform a tribute to deceased musicians, but the emotional content felt too risky for his current level of recovery stability. "Victoria," Maya said as they walked toward the subway station, "are you coming to dinner Sunday? Dad's making his famous Puerto Rican rice, and Carmen is visiting from Hartford." The casual invitation reflected the slow integration of their extended family that had taken place over the past year. Carmen had gradually moved from skeptical critic to cautious supporter of Sam's choices, recognizing that his commitment to recovery was genuine and that Maya was thriving under their current family arrangement. Victoria had become a regular presence at family dinners, her relationship with both Sam and Maya developing at the careful pace that characterized all of Sam's post-recovery connections. "I'd love to come," Victoria replied, "but only if Carmen promises not to grill me about my intentions regarding your father." Maya laughed. "She's gotten better about that. Now she only does the interrogation thing during dessert, instead of the entire meal." Ndatumot. As they rode the subway back to Queens, Sam reflected on the peculiar mathematics of recovery, how subtraction often led to addition, how saying no to opportunities created space for relationships, how choosing limitation over expansion could result in a life that felt more rather than less fulfilling. The apartment in Queens was still small, still modest, but it had become the center of a life that felt sustainable rather than precarious. Maya's artwork covered the refrigerator, mixing school projects with more sophisticated pieces that reflected her growing artistic confidence. Sam's keyboard occupied one corner of the living room, available for daily practice, but not dominating the space the way music had once dominated his entire identity. "Dad," Maya said, as they prepared dinner together, a routine they'd maintained since she was 8 and Sam was newly sober. "Mrs. Patterson asked if I wanted to audition for the youth orchestra at Lincoln Center." Sam looked up from the vegetables he was chopping, recognizing the careful tone Maya used when raising topics that might trigger his anxiety about her exposure to competitive musical environments. "How do you feel about that?" Sam asked. "Excited but not desperate," Maya replied, using language she'd learned from observing her father's recovery process. "Like it would be fun to try, but I wouldn't be devastated if it didn't work out." This had become their family's approach to opportunities, engaging with interest rather than attachment, pursuing growth without defining self-worth through external achievement. "Then you should audition," Sam said, "and regardless of what happens, we'll celebrate the courage it takes to put yourself out there." As they finished preparing dinner, Victoria arrived with flowers and a bottle of sparkling cider that had become her standard contribution to family meals. Carmen arrived shortly after, her nursing shift having ended early, bringing homemade flan and skeptical questions about the recording session that masked genuine pride in her brother's continued stability. The evening conversation covered Maya's school projects, Carmen's new relationship with a fellow nurse, Victoria's latest corporate social responsibility initiatives, and Sam's growing confidence that he could maintain creative expression without threatening his recovery. It was the kind of ordinary family dinner that Sam had never imagined possible during his drinking years, present, stable, focused on connection rather than crisis management. "Sam," Carmen said during dessert, her tone carrying the clinical directness that had never entirely left her family interactions, "you look happy. Genuinely happy, not just maintaining sobriety happy. Sam considered the observation. Carmen was right. Somewhere in the past 2 years, the constant vigilance of early recovery had evolved into something that felt more like natural contentment. He still attended AA meetings twice weekly, still worked with Marcus on managing stress and emotional triggers, still monitored his mental health with the attention that addiction required. But the underlying sense of deprivation and struggle that had characterized his first years of sobriety had gradually been replaced by appreciation for what he'd built, rather than grief for what he'd lost. "I think," Sam said slowly, "I've finally stopped measuring my current life against imaginary alternatives. This," he gestured around the table at Maya, Victoria, and Carmen, "this is enough, more than enough." Victoria reached over and took his hand, a gesture that had become natural over their months of careful relationship building. "What changed?" "I stopped believing that being exceptional was more important than being present," Sam replied. "Recovery taught me that my value doesn't depend on other people's recognition of my talents. Maya taught me that the most important performances happen daily, in small moments that nobody else witnesses." As the evening wound down and Victoria prepared to return to her Manhattan apartment, she lingered at the door with Sam while Maya and Carmen discussed school schedules in the kitchen. "Sam," Victoria said quietly, "I know we've been taking things slowly, and I appreciate your caution about introducing romantic complications into Maya's life. But I want you to know that what we're building together feels like the most important relationship I've ever had." Sam smiled, recognizing that Victoria had learned to express emotion directly rather than through corporate metaphors or professional achievement. "Victoria, you've become family to both Maya and me. Whatever form that takes, whether it stays friendship or becomes something more formal, you're already part of what makes our life feel complete." As Victoria left and Carmen helped clean up dinner dishes, Sam realized that recovery had taught him something unexpected about love, that sustainable relationships were built through daily choice rather than dramatic gesture, through consistent presence rather than passionate intensity, through mutual support of each other's growth rather than romantic fantasy about completion or rescue. "Dad," Maya said as they finished cleaning the kitchen, "are you and Victoria going to get married eventually?" Sam looked at his daughter, now 15, sophisticated in her understanding of adult relationships, but still young enough to want clear answers about family stability. "Maybe," Sam said honestly, "but only if we can do it in a way that strengthens rather than complicates what we already have. The three of us work well together. Any changes would need to make that even better, not just different." Maya nodded, satisfied with the answer. At 15, she understood that some questions were less important than the underlying security they represented. As Sam tucked Maya into bed, a routine they'd maintained despite her protests that 15 was too old for bedtime stories, he reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from his decision to prioritize recovery over artistic ambition. The viral video had nearly destroyed his carefully constructed life, but the crisis had forced him to confront questions about value, purpose, and identity that had ultimately led to a more authentic existence. He was still musical, still creative, still capable of moving people through artistic expression. But those abilities now served his life rather than defining it, supported his relationships rather than threatening them, and contributed to community well-being rather than personal recognition. "Dad," Maya said sleepily, "I'm proud of you. Not because you're talented, but because you chose to be my father instead of chasing things that didn't matter." Some compliments, Sam realized, were worth more than any professional review or industry recognition. Some audiences were small enough to love you and large enough to matter. As he turned off Maya's bedroom light and prepared for his own evening routine of gratitude journaling and meditation, recovery practices that had become as natural as brushing his teeth. Sam understood that the most successful performances were often the ones that happened without any audience at all. Tomorrow, he would teach piano lessons to community members who needed art in their lives, attend his weekly recovery meeting, help Maya with algebra homework, and maybe work on a new song about the ordinary miracles that comprised sustainable happiness. It wasn't the life he'd imagined at 25, when artistic recognition had seemed like the only form of success worth pursuing. But it was the life that allowed him to sleep peacefully, wake up grateful, and trust that each day offered enough purpose and connection to justify the choice to stay sober. Some dreams, Sam had learned, were worth abandoning in favor of realities that actually sustained the people you loved most. This story reminds us that true success isn't measured by external recognition or professional achievement, but by our ability to show up consistently for the people who depend on us. In a world that often equates worth with visibility, Sam's journey shows us that the most important performances happen in the quiet moments when nobody is watching. The daily choice to prioritize stability over excitement, presence over ambition, and authentic connection over impressive credentials. Recovery, whether from addiction or any life circumstance that requires rebuilding, teaches us that sustainable happiness comes not from getting what we think we want, but from wanting what we actually have. Sometimes the greatest act of love is choosing the ordinary life that serves our family over the extraordinary opportunity that serves our ego. What relationships in your life deserve more consistency than intensity? What dreams might you need to release to embrace the reality that's actually asking for your attention? Like and subscribe for more stories that celebrate the courage to choose presence over performance, the wisdom to prioritize relationships over recognition, and the truth that the most meaningful lives are often built through daily choices rather than dramatic gestures.